This is the food fraud tabletop exercise. This is the fifth video, which is Module 1, the pre-incident. We'll provide an introduction, we'll note the break, then we'll provide the questions, and then the next activity will be to review the questions as groups. We'll present the scenario, we'll discuss the work sections, and then the debrief. So here are the incidents. Now you'll notice that for convenience and familiarity in the pilot session, the three principal investigators were Brad, myself, John, and Doug, and so we used our names to present the topic in here. So a consumer complaint about bad smoked fish. So a lot of times we don't hear or receive very scientific explanations from consumers. But a consumer complaint about bad smoked fish triggers a routine inspection at Brad's convenience store in Gaylord, Michigan. Key is bad smoked fish. The location is company is Brad's, and then the facility is Brad's, and the location is within the state of Michigan. The food inspector finds packages of smoked whitefish. The label says Doug's Lake Superior Smoked Whitefish. It does have an address, properly labeled 450 Air Park Boulevard, Duluth, Minnesota. Key here is that it's properly labeled. It's from a company called Doug's, and it's from Minnesota. The packages appear intact, are being held at temperature, and are within the sell-by date. So at this point, some of the typical routine concerns are not in place. The packaging said it was Lake Superior whitefish, but it looked odd. And the inspector was familiar enough with fish to recognize that these fish were not whitefish. They looked like tilapia. So what was labeled as whitefish does not look like whitefish. It looks like, and there was information or insight that this was maybe tilapia. The inspector noted other concerns in the store as well, including discolored red meat that appeared to have been refrozen, so frozen, unfrozen, and refrozen, and some packaged candy on the counter that did not have English language labeling. Now, it's plausible that there could be all these incidents at the same location. A real key here is to keep your eyes open, to be aware that there could be other things going on. So if you only focused on the whitefish and got going there, then you may miss some of these other triggers. The convenience store manager said all of these items were purchased from John's Distribution Warehouse Company in Michigan, a few miles away. So key here is they were all purchased from the same distributor, John's, in Michigan and local. So these weren't ordered on the internet or from far away. They were someone that was local. The inspector knew the area and knew that the John's warehouse location was not licensed. So an inspector, especially a local inspector, probably knows who's operating in their area, and thus would be able to identify who was not supposed to be or not licensed in their area. The inspector issues a seizure order for the fish, meat, and candy not labeled in English, and collects a sample of each. At this point, the inspector has started an action, being the seizure, and the inspector calls her supervisor, who is at a food safety conference, and relays what she has found. The supervisor knows his Minnesota counterpart, who is at the same conference, and provides the background on the smoked fish label. So at this point, we have the communication going from the field, the inspector, the supervisor, into headquarters, and then going from Michigan to Minnesota. So whether this is a formal or informal process yet, we have had this has been elevated, and it's also gone across boundaries. So we'll take the break, but the thing is, here's the questions for the table activity. First off, consider the developments while answering the signed questions. The questions will be in the next page. Identify any additional requirements, critical issues, decisions, and questions you think should be addressed at this time. So from your expert insight, what's missing so far? What should these specifically the inspector, supervisor, and then the counterpart in Minnesota be doing at this time? Include 1 to 3 main points gathered at your table from the assigned questions or participant questions, and plan to briefly report out to your roles and responsibilities to date in this scenario. So what do you do in your job, and would you have a role or responsibility here? The questions for all groups are, first, is there a public health threat? So really to start with yes or no. How would this be shared with the public, this information? How, when, and how? Should this be publicly posted or alerted? Second, what type of food fraud is possibly occurring? Now think about the different incidents and consider the details there again of the scenarios. So what type of fraud is occurring? Should this report be reported to whom and when? What should happen to the samples? So the inspector does have samples and the product's been seized, but should those samples be sent? Where would you send it? Do you know which lab to send it to? Does that lab have the facilities and the capabilities to conduct this test? If there's outside resources needed, is there a budget for that? Is it automatic or will there be special approvals needed? What's the legal authority for a seizure? So not just to say we seize this because there's a concern. Exactly what's the legal authority? And then we'll just go through and have that whole group recap. And after that, we'll move on to the next video, module 2, which will be more information on the early incident. Please conduct the activity, then move to the next.